Caleb Ironwood pulled the reins about to turn back when a scene stopped him in his tracks. 5 wooden poles standing alone in the middle of the field. Each one with a body hanging upside down, swaying in the hot wind. He squinted. They were not corpses. They were women. Apache Caleb spurred his horse forward. The sight before him made his chest tighten like it was music being crushed. 5 young women tied upside down by thick ropes wrapped tightly around their ankles. Blood from their scraped wrists dripped onto the scorching sand. Their hair hung loose, half covering their faces which were burning under the relentless sun. The youngest, the smallest one, was barely conscious, her breath nearly gone through the sound of the dry burning wind and the cawing of crows overhead. A hoarse voice rose up. The eldest Nieli was still trying to lift her head even as the blood pooling in her face turned it purple. Her dark eyes locked onto Caleb's, clinging to the last shred of hope she had. "Please," she gasped, her breath shallow and broken. "Save us. I will bear your child. You can plant your seed in me every day. Just save my sisters." Caleb froze. He had heard many desperate pleas before, but nothing like this. This was not a seduction. This was the voice of a sister willing to sacrifice herself so the others could live. His jaw clenched. He did not need to think twice. Caleb drew his knife and cut down the youngest first, then the second, then the third, the fourth. The sun scorched his back, but he did not stop until Nieli fell into his arms, trembling. "You are safe now," Caleb said, his voice steady and low. "No one is going to die here today." Caleb laid Nieli down gently on the dry grass beside his horse, then turned back to carry Suni, the youngest first. Her frail body was so light. He felt as if one more gust of wind might carry her away. The other 4 sisters lay limp in the narrow shade cast by the wooden poles. Each of them marked with deep bruises from being suspended upside down for too long. Caleb was no young man anymore. But every movement he made was swift and sure, driven by the instinct of someone who had once carried his wife through wave after wave of fever. Though his wife had not survived in the end, that helplessness had haunted him for years, he would not let these young women die hanging in silence. He carried them one by one on horseback. 3 trips through blistering heat that felt like fire on his skin. Only when all of them were finally lying in the shade beside his barn did Caleb feel the dizziness of dehydration hit him. But he did not stop. He poured water into his hand and let it drip gently onto their lips. Afraid that giving too much too fast might send their bodies into shock. Suni drank a few drops and immediately clutched at his hand. Alohi and Kiana gasped for air like swimmers breaking the surface. Tala was still unconscious. Nieli opened her eyes but could not speak, her breath heavy like stones pressed against her chest. Only now did Caleb have a moment to really look at the eldest sister. Her long black hair was tangled and wild. Her cheeks swollen from the blood rushing to her face while she was hung upside down, but her eyes tired and bloodshot still held a rare light. The gaze of someone who had stood at death's door and still tried to hold on to life for others. Caleb dipped a cloth in cold water and laid it gently across her forehead. As Nieli's breathing began to steady, she whispered softly. "What I said out there," Caleb shook his head, cutting her off at once. "Forget it. You said it to save your sisters. I understand." Nieli tried to swallow her shame, feeling exposed in front of this stranger. But then Caleb spoke words that left her stunned. "No one here has to pay with their body to live. Not with me." That simple sentence silenced all 5 Apache sisters. Girls who had grown up in a world where town men treated them like property. The whole moment seemed to slow as if the air itself was listening. Caleb kept working, tending to each of them, wrapping wounds, checking pulses, shielding them from the sun. And never once did his eyes carry the look of a man who thought he owned them. Nieli, exhausted as she was, felt the corners of her eyes burn. For the first time in their lives, a man had come not to take something from them, but to return what had been stolen, the right to live as human beings. 3 days passed at the Ironwood Ranch, like time drifting between 2 worlds. On one side, the blazing desert sun. On the other, the gentle warmth of the man whose hands had pulled them back from death hanging in that open field. Caleb cared for the 5 Apache sisters as if they were his own family, cooking porridge, helping them sit up, cleaning their wounds, and every night lighting a lamp to keep watch in case a fever returned. He did it all in silence. With a kindness so rare that Nayeli never imagined she would ever feel it in her lifetime. Suni, the youngest, had started smiling again. Alohi and Kiana could take a few steps now. Tala, still stubborn as ever, insisted on helping out in the stable, even though she could barely stand. Only Nayeli had yet to recover fully. Her shoulders and back hurt so badly that even the smallest movement made her breath catch. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the window in thin golden ribbons, Caleb stepped into the room to change her bandages. Nayeli was sitting up against the wall, her eyes following his every move, steady, gentle, with not even a flicker of desire or demand. As he tied the last knot on her bandage, Nayeli spoke softly. "Caleb, that day in the field, when I said those words, I thought I was going to die. I just wanted my sisters to live." Caleb sat down, meeting her gaze. "I know, and you owe me nothing." A quiet pause filled the room. Nayeli clutched the blanket as if wrestling with something deep inside. Then she looked up, her dark eyes clear and unwavering. "But today, I want to say those words again. Not out of fear, not to repay a debt, but because I want to choose." Caleb froze. His weathered heart felt as if someone had taken hold of it. Nayeli continued, her voice quiet, but sure. "My whole life, men from town have always taken what they believed belonged to them. But you saved me without taking anything. And that is why. I want to give something I have never had the right to give." She reached out and took his hand, a simple gesture, but one that nearly took the air from his lungs. "Caleb Ironwood, if you want me, I am yours willingly." With my own choice, Caleb could hear the pounding of his own heart, but he placed his hand on her shoulder and said, voice deep and steady, "And I do not want to touch you while you are still weak. And I will never touch you just because you think you owe me something." Nayeli smiled, light as a breeze for the first time. "This is not a debt. This is a decision. FRM. A woman who finally gets to choose." And in that moment, Caleb understood love does not come from promises made in desperation, but from the strength of a woman who rises from death and chooses herself again. News of the 5 Apache sisters disappearing from the dry field spread faster than desert wind. And Morgan Wade, the man who held life and death in his hands around these parts, completely lost his mind. When he found out his merchandise had vanished just a day before he planned to sell them to the biggest saloon in town, he roared at his men. "No one hides them from me. Search every field, every valley. I want those girls back, dead or alive." That night, when the moon hung like a sliver of a blade in the sky, Caleb was building a fire outside when the sound of horses thundered in from the distance. Red dust curled into the air beneath the moonlight. Caleb stood, his eyes sharpening. He had known this day would come, and he had prepared for it. Silently, he stepped back into the house, checked the locks, and looked over the 5 sisters sleeping. Nayeli still rested against the wall, her face tensing slightly as the scent of horse dust reached her. "Is it him?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "But we are not running. Not tonight." Because on that very first night when Nayeli was still half-conscious, Caleb had already sent a telegram to Sheriff Allen. "There are 5 Apache women being held and tortured. Morgan Wade may be behind it. Please come investigate immediately." Outside, the horses screamed. Torches flared to life. More than a dozen of WDE's men surrounded the ranch like a pack of hungry wolves. WDE sat on his black horse. A wicked smile stretched across his face in the firelight. "Caleb Ironwood," he bellowed. "Hand them over. They belong to me." Caleb stepped out onto the porch. A Winchester in his hand. Barrel pointed down a stance not of aggression, but of protection. "They do not belong to anyone," Caleb said, voice low but firm. "They are free people." Wade let out a cruel laugh. "Free? Apache? Do not be stupid. I bought them from their father before he died. They owe me. And you? You are not big enough to stand against me. The moment Wade urged his horse forward, the sound of a police whistle shattered the night. 20 town deputies appeared from the west. Weapons drawn. Sheriff Allen rode at the front, pointing directly at Wade. Morgan Wade. You are under arrest for kidnapping, torture, and trafficking of human beings. WDE's men panicked. Wade spun his horse to flee, but a warning shot froze him in place. Nayeli stood behind the window and watched it unfold, her heart swelling with a feeling she had never known before. For the first time in her life, a man stood between her and evil, not for profit, but for what was right. Wade was cuffed in the middle of Caleb's yard, his face pressed into the dusty ground. Caleb came back inside and found Nayeli trembling slightly. "It is over," he said softly. "No one is ever going to hurt you again." And for the first time since the day she was hung from a wooden post, Nayeli felt truly safe. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of dusty evenings and the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, subscribe to my channel so each day we can sit down together again and I will tell you another tale from the Old West. The next morning, just as the sun peeked over the Dragoon Mountains, Sheriff Allen returned to Caleb's ranch. In his hands was a stack of warrant papers stamped in red with the seal of the territorial court. Caleb stood on the porch and Nile sat by the window. Her 4 younger sisters gathered around her. Allen spoke slowly, each word peeling away the invisible chains that had bound the girls for years. We searched Morgan Wade's storage. All the debt contracts tied to your tribe. They were forgeries. Not a single one is legally valid. Aluff, he choked up. So we do not owe him anything? Allen nodded. No, each of you is free, and Wade will be in prison for many years. Suni was the first to cry. Kiana wrapped her arms around her. Tala, the strongest of them all, began trembling and could not stay on her feet. In their entire lives, there had never been a moment like this. A moment when their fates were no longer controlled by anyone else. Allen turned to Caleb. You saved them just in time. One more day. He did not finish, but everyone understood. When the deputies left, the 4 younger sisters quickly began making plans to return to the tribe. They missed the red earth, the beat of the drums, the warmth of the fire. Nayeli smiled at their joy, but her eyes, without realizing it, drifted toward Caleb. That evening, as the crimson sun spilled over the fields, Caleb went out to the stable to check the saddles for the journey back to the tribe. Nayeli approached from behind. Do you think I will be going with them? She asked, her voice gentle, but enough to tighten something in Caleb's chest. He turned away, avoiding her gaze. You should go. That is where you belong. It is safe there, and you owe me nothing. Nayeli stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm, stopping him mid-motion. That is exactly why I want to stay. Caleb looked up. Her dark eyes now held a calm he had never seen before. No more fear. No more submission. No longer the sister hanging from a wooden post in the middle of a field, but a woman completely free. I am not staying because of what I said tied to that post, Nayeli said. Not out of gratitude, not out of guilt, I choose, because I want to. Caleb felt his throat tighten. And in that moment, he understood that whatever they shared had grown beyond fear, beyond scars, beyond the limits life had once placed on them. Nayeli placed her hand over his chest. You gave me back the right to choose. Now let me use it. And then in a voice as steady as the ground beneath their feet, she said, I am staying. In the days after her sisters left the ranch to return to their tribe, Ironwood Ranch grew strangely quiet. Only Caleb and Nayeli remained 2 souls bound by a choice they had not yet found the words to name. In the mornings, they worked side by side. In the afternoons, Caleb taught Nayeli how to ride, how to cut rope, how to read the wind. At night they sat by the lamplight and spoke of things they had never dared to share before. And when darkness fell, Nayeli came to him willingly. Caleb was no young man. He was 50 years old, had spent his life doing hard labor, and his heart had once been fractured by the death of his wife. But the fierce and gentle strength of Nayeli, and the new love growing between them was something he could not deny. For many nights, they came together not just in body, but in a way that felt like rebirth. A kind of closeness life had once stolen from them, now returned in its truest form. But there was one thing Caleb did not notice. His body was no longer young. On one sweltering afternoon, as he hoisted a heavy sack of horse feed, a wave of dizziness struck him. His heart pounded like it was trying to break free from his chest. He tried to stay upright, tried to take a deep breath, but everything went black. The sack dropped. Caleb fell to his knees, then collapsed onto the dusty ground of the stable. Nayeli heard the sound. She ran. And when she saw him lying there, breath shallow, face pale, her heart felt like it was being torn apart. "Caleb," she cried, dropping beside him, cradling his head in her arms. His chest heaved once, then slowed. There had never been a moment in Nayeli's life that terrified her more. Not even when she hung upside down in the sun-baked field. Not even when Wade held a blade to her throat. Do not leave me," she whispered, hands trembling as they stroked his hair. "You saved me from death. Do not make me watch you die." She pulled him from the dirt, rested his head in her lap, pressing her ear to his chest. His heartbeat was weak, but still there. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto his dust-covered skin. In that moment, Nayeli understood one thing with painful clarity. If Caleb died, she would lose the only person who had ever seen her as fully human. She was no longer the woman who once begged for her sister's lives with a broken voice.